Student protests at various universities across the country are showing no signs of slowing. In fact, the South African Union of Students is accusing Higher Education Minister Dr. Blade Nzimande's handling of their concerns and has vowed to continue with that nationwide shutdown. At the core of the crisis is higher education funding and students' historic debt. Now, according to Free State University Chancellor Prof Bonang Mohale, the Freedom Charter is exposing government's failures in addressing inequality. The Prof joins us now via our video link in Johannesburg. Prof Mohale, always great getting your insights on these issues. It's great to have you on the program. Thanks so much for making time. So many have lamented the fact that we have gotten here before in some respects. One thinks fees must fall, roads must fall, etc. But many others also believe that we shouldn't be here. You part of the community that aligns itself to the latter.
Absolutely, Ayanda, and thank you for having me. Maybe as a start, I think our sympathies and sincere condolences to the clan, colleagues and friends of the slain 35-year-old Ubabu Mthokozisi, Edwin Tumba, a father of four, a former SASCO member, and indeed who has actually sacrificed, probably the supreme sacrifice of all, by being the first victim to die before we can take ourselves seriously, but also what we do seriously. This is a student who has just gotten his master's degree in management of technology and innovation, a leader of the ANC branch in Kempton Park, and a regional organizer in Ekurhuleni. And effective the 1st of March 2016, he was appointed by the City of Tshwane Metropolitan Municipality as a human settlement planner in the Human Settlement Department, responsible for the planning of the informal settlements. So I think for us, it's heartbreaking that we have to wait until we kill somebody before we start taking the issue of student funding much more seriously. By the way, Ayanda, remember it has been 7 years since 2015, during the genesis of the hashtag Everything Must Fall, initially precipitated by the fees must fall, followed by roads must fall. I think it culminated in the decolonization movement. Since then, South Africa has witnessed the annual student protests linked to exclusion on financial grounds, leading to annual disruptions at universities. And yet all of us agree that no student who meets both the funding and the study criteria should be excluded from university, let alone finally as students who are on track to complete and now need to be excluded because they owe money. The situation is exacerbated by the fact that actually our government is now technically bankrupt, being hit by the quadruple helix of the pandemic, of the sub-investment grade, of the economic recession, and of course, the 9 wasted years of industrial scale state capture. Yeah. The pandemic has led to a year-long lockdown that has now decimated the economy, with many businesses closing, thereby leading to massive job losses. The end result is that the South African Revenue Services has collected less revenue than planned because government doesn't have the money. All the department budgets have now been cut, and therefore budgets must be reprioritized. The Department of Higher Education is also not spared this because now they have to make the shortfall of 7 billion that comes from the National Student Financial Aid Scheme for first-year students. This is on top of the 10 billion historic debt by the 26 public universities. So for me, I don't know why we have to be where we are today, because Ubabu Sizwe Ngasana's National Education Collaboration Trust, that involved all the social partners, had the expectation that by now both common cause and common ground should have been reached to deal decisively with the issue of historic debt, especially because Cabinet has already agreed that a comprehensive review of student policy is urgently required.
Prof, if we can come in there very quickly. You know, it almost feels like there's a kind of call it a cognitive dissonance in the public domain, isn't it? I mean, on the one hand, there's an overwhelming sentiment that nobody should be excluded on the basis of financial need. But on the other hand, for a very long time, our society has been able to almost overlook the fact that this has been happening. Where are we missing each other, at least on the basis of the principles?
I think for me, the Blade platform was provided by the surprise announcement without the attendant planning being formalized and finalized of the fee-free higher education. Here we are talking about if every single solitary one of the students that's registered is provided free education, that's 50 billion. But if you look at only those that need, and the threshold here is a combined household of 600,000 per annum, is looked at, we are then talking about 20 billion. I must be absolutely categorical. It is government that must lead, of course in consultation with all the social partners and the universities, in finding a sustainable national solution to settling student historic debt in the short term towards a much more reliable, resilient higher education funding model in the long term. What is needed, amongst others, is urgent resolution of the proper level of university tuition fee, of a proper level of subsidy funding, student funding, operational expenditure, and infrastructure development funding. And I think that's where we are failing these students. We take them from the rural areas and the townships, and we bring them to our universities in order to fail them. Universities were initially created to connect people. In our country, 27 years into democracy, we have succeeded in increasing the absolute numbers from 7% to 11%. And we hope that the 11% realize that by definition, it makes them part of an elite. And yet we hope and pray that they will resist the temptation to be elitist and therefore exclusionary.
Yeah.
For us, the biggest injustice was exclusion, Ayanda.
Yeah, on that score, Prof, allow me to broaden the conversation at the risk of being accused of moving the goalposts. I mean, when we think about what universities were built for, are we also doing enough to think about the role that universities ought to play today? I mean, you know, for the longest time, an institution of higher learning has been seen as this vessel of knowledge and the only way of becoming part of the elite. Should we start having a bit more nuance by broadening that to try and ascertain whether or not the path to that elite status can actually be taken through various other avenues? Is it too soon to start adding that nuance?
No. In fact, you're absolutely correct. I think you've hit the nail on the head. So if we think of the year 2020 as the year of the digital revolution, let us, all of us now, join hands in making 2021 to be the year of the Noah's Ark, bringing people in. To do what? To empower universities to become inclusive centers of excellence, to be awake to the still persistent inequalities and how these continue to shape a sense of belonging, ownership, identity, access, language, symbols, attitudes, and expectations, in order to be able to support the emergence of institutions that nurture young people to come out of these institutions, not only with the hard skills, but with a sense of social justice, critical thinking, and curiosity, to be able to conceptualize ethical frameworks that will guide societal engagement with universities, to promote public ownership of these universities. And indeed, where the public recognize that their role as both beneficiaries and stakeholders in the accomplishment of the universities to develop a social justice approach to higher education, where universities propel democratic engagement and advocate for academic freedom, which nurtures success of the higher education system through assessment of totally different perspectives from what we have used in the past. I think all of us need to help in order to achieve an incessant, consistent, and persistent pursuit of equality, to be able to inform, to inspire, and ignite new efforts to achieve a world where eventually every student, every woman, and every man, every black person and every white person can look forward to fair and equal treatment. Let me make you an example, Ayanda. You know, we spend 50 billion on TVET colleges with a 3% completion rate. We insist on funneling everybody to being a university student, because with a university degree, you've got an 85% chance of getting a job. TVET, 53%. And yet, if you have only grade 12 or less, that percentage is 50 and going down. And yet in Germany, the makers of the best cars in the world, they catch you at standard 8. Not everybody needs to college or university, and they shouldn't. And they make you a motor mechanic. These are the people that live in Leondale and Don Park, blue-collar workers. Today, I pay more per hour to my plumber than I pay the cardiothoracic surgeon. I don't know why we killed nurses' training colleges, teachers' training colleges, even private institutions by companies on apprenticeship programs, 4 years where they pay a stipend of 3,500, but after 4 years when you write your government ticket, your salary moves from 3,500 to 10,000. That's what we should be doing, thinking critically, creatively, and innovatively about how we can give all our children.
With that in the backdrop, Prof, the Vice Chancellors and the Higher Education Department are meeting today. In about 20 seconds, what ought to be at the top of the agenda?
I think number one is how do we expunge and deal by government the historic debt. This 10 billion that I'm talking about, 1.6 billion is KwaZulu-Natal, 1 billion is the University of the Witwatersrand. It cannot be that 27 years into democracy, the historically black universities continue to be poor. The historically white universities continue to do well. The best university in the world is Harvard, endowment policy of 80 billion, followed by Stanford. You look at Instituto de Empresa in Madrid, and indeed University of British Columbia in Vancouver. When you have money, you are able to do some really creative stuff. Here, I think we are just refusing to allocate the correct budget to education. And yet we know that education is the only surest ways in which our kids can transcend social classes, Ayanda.
Right. Professor Bonang Mohale, always great getting your insights. Appreciate you making time. He's the Chancellor at the University of the Free State. Thanks very much indeed.